It's March 1st here in Oregon on a farm west of Boring. I was thinking that some of you might be wondering where in the world the name west of Boring came from. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a history of our farm here and let you know a little bit about us. So let's go. My father had a construction company in Portland, Oregon back in the post-World War II era, and he had quite a bit of equipment, scaffolding and other construction equipment, and he decided that he didn't have enough room on the piece of property that they lived on in Portland, so he sent my mom on a mission to find a farm outside of Portland where he could store his construction equipment. I was fairly young at the time, maybe 4 years old, and I can remember specifically getting in the car with my mom and driving out into the countryside east of Portland looking for a farm. And it wasn't very successful at first, but one day I remember, late 1955, we were driving up a hill, and as we got to the top of the hill, my mom said, "I don't think we're going to find anything past here, let's turn around." And I said, in my 4-year-old voice, "Let's keep going." So we went over the top of the hill and down the other side of the hill, and lo and behold, there was a farm that was for sale. 6 acres. It had a old little farmhouse on it, several outbuildings, and a large barn, which is what my dad was looking for. So one thing led to another. My dad approved. They purchased the property, and we moved here in November of 1955 in the midst of one of the worst snowstorms the area had seen in a while. I can remember moving into the little house and seeing the snow blow through the cracks in the wall as the wind howled through the house, and it was cold, and they had a little oil burning stove to try to keep the place warm. I had a brother and a sister, plus myself and my 2 parents, of course, so there were 5 of us living in this little house. We did make it through the first winter, though, but I was quite enthralled with the countryside covered in snow, and we really sort of enjoyed it. My father had a background in skiing and ski jumping, and so it was really quite wonderful to be out here, be able to use skis out in the countryside here, and we had a pretty good time that first winter. But it was cold, and it was windy, and I think there was quite a shock having moved from a nice big house in the city out to the countryside. My mom became quite intent on doing what today would be called homesteading. She ended up buying some dogs and cats, and we did have one dog that we brought from the city, but we then got a collie and some cats and some chickens, and we really changed our lifestyle. The neighbor across the street had a big dairy, Holstein cows. He had quite a few. He had a dairy, and so usually every other day he would come up with a big gallon of fresh milk that they had just milked off their cows and hang it from the tree outside our front door. And that was milk that I'd never seen before. It had probably the top third was just heavy cream, and then the rest was milk. It was just, it was wonderful stuff. As I said before, the property had several buildings, a small house. I think there were 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, dining room, living room, and a small bathroom. And there were several outbuildings. One was a chicken house, and you'll find this quite interesting, but the chicken house later became our shop and is now the home to our Woodland Mills sawmill in the downstairs area of that shop building. So the chicken house has been here since we moved here in 1955 and has gone through some major upgrades But now it has a Woodland Mills sawmill in the basement, and that's what many of my videos are about, is sawing on that sawmill. There also was an outbuilding which was called the Milk House that had been built by previous people who owned the property named Kraus. And they had built this milk house as a place to store the milk because they had at one time also had dairy cattle, and they needed a place a cool house. They made it out of block and a place they could keep the milk cool after the cows had been milked. Today that milk house is a small apartment where one of our sons lives, and also another room where we have storage. We store things in there. But that also was originally on the property. Also, there was a large barn, very large barn, and that's of course what my father wanted, and for storing all of his scaffolding and construction equipment. Unfortunately, that barn blew down in October of 1962 in what was called around here the Columbus Day storm, which was a hurricane-size typhoon that blew in off the Pacific coast and hit western Oregon and did a lot of destruction. It literally just picked our barn up and blew it up into the filbert orchard up above our property. I can remember the night of that storm, and standing inside the little house and looking out through the window out toward the barn, and watching it shake and shudder as the wind got more intense. And suddenly, it was like the scene from The Wizard of Oz where the house gets carried off into the tornado. The barn just literally got picked up and disintegrated and blew away. It was quite exciting and quite scary. Next morning we found the majority of the barn up in the neighbor's filbert orchard, and thus had quite the job going up there and retrieving all the parts to the barn. Over the years we've used a lot of those parts, big large beams from that barn, in construction of the home that we live in now, which my parents built about that same time in the 1962 era. And also I've used some of those beams in remodeling the other house, which was our original house that we lived in here. And then more recently, my wife and I have remodeled the house that my parents built in 1962. And we remodeled the kitchen, and we have the last of those beams from that barn up in the vaulted ceiling above the kitchen, and that's sort of our last hurrah for the barn that blew away in 1962. So that's part one of our history. I will be doing some more of these videos to share some more of the history of our farm here west of Boring. Oh, and as far as the name, West of Boring, where did that come from? My mom wrote a book, it's still in a manuscript form, that is called Just a Few Miles West of Boring. And she coined that term basically because we are west of Boring. And you wonder where the name Boring came from. It came from an early settler whose last name was Boring, who settled the area around this little hamlet of Boring, Oregon. You can look it up on Google and see where Boring is. It's we're also located in an area that's called the Boring lava fields. I think it's basically an area where there's a whole series of small volcanic buttes in the area east of Portland, and it's called the Boring Lava. I think Boring Lava Buttes. There goes my phone. So I guess it's about time to end this video. Come back again, and I'll be putting more history videos about our farm west of Boring on our YouTube channel. If you like this video, if we've earned your appreciation, please hit the thumbs up button down there. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. That will help us in our growth on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.